Is the air quality around ground zero a hazard?
Yes. The indoor air quality is undoubtedly a hazard in many places. The problem is, since proper testing hasn't been done, we don't know how many places, we don't know how many thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people are being slowly poisoned by contaminated workspaces and schools and apartments. As the Inspector General recommended, we ought to do proper indoor testing in going out in concentric circles from the World Trade Center. We may find that in one direction the problem is 3 blocks. We may find that in another direction it's 3 miles. And then we have to systematically and properly clean up, decontaminate those apartments and workspaces. Testimony at the Ombudsman hearing a year and a half ago said that the average cost of decontaminating properly an apartment would be between $10,000 and $20,000.
Per apartment?
Per apartment.
And who would pay for that?
Federal government. It's mandate under law.
Tell us about the initial government response to dealing with the air quality surrounding the World Trade Center after the attacks.
Well, the initial government response was frankly terrible, and what I'm about to say, everything I'm about to say came out in the Inspector General's report, but everything I'm about to say, everything that was in the Inspector General's report was not new. I had been saying it for almost 2 years. Environmental groups have been saying it. Others have been saying it. The Ombudsman's office of EPA said it, and because they said it, Christy Todd Whitman dismantled the Ombudsman's office, destroyed the office. The only thing new in the IG report was that the misrepresentations and lies that the EPA told us were done at the direction of the White House. That we didn't know. Everything else was quite well known to people who were looking into it, and of course vociferously denied by the EPA and the administration, but also meticulously documented. The first thing that happened was within 2 days of the disaster, Christy Todd Whitman went on the air and said, the head of the EPA went on the air and said that the air was safe to breathe and New Yorkers could go back to work without worrying about it. When she said that, there had been 0 testing done. She had no basis in data to say that. She kept saying it, the EPA kept saying it, even after there was at first sketchy and then voluminous data to say that the air was far from safe. For example, the University of California, Davis, headed by a fellow named Thomas, I think his first name, Cahill, set up instruments on the roof of the federal building at Varick and Houston Street, the building my office is in, which is a mile north of Ground Zero. They did this on October 3rd. About 3 weeks after 9/11, and those instruments stayed there and they kept getting readings at least through the end of January. And we knew by October 3rd or 4th, they told us, they told the EPA, they told anybody who had listened, that the readings a mile north of Ground Zero 3 weeks afterwards were the worst cocktail brew of toxins they'd ever seen, worse than the Kuwaiti oil fire. That was the direct quote at the time. And that was true at least as late as late January of 2002, the outdoor air. Nonetheless, we kept getting all these reassurances that everything was okay, on the basis of which people told their employees, you got to come back to work, even though the air is unsafe, because they believed, the EPA said so, the air was safe, on the basis of which schools reopened in the area, and parents were told it's okay. We had testimony recently at a press conference from a doctor at Mount Sinai, a lung expert, who said that, who's a pediatrician, who said that he told hundreds of parents it was okay to send their kids back to school. He relied on the EPA assurances. He wished he hadn't done it because he now has to call all these people and say the kids had better be examined because the air was not safe. Based on those assurances, we know that many of the first responders, the cops, the firefighters from all over the country didn't use respirators. We also know that, contrary to what Christy Todd Whitman has said, many of them were not given respirators. Many were told, don't wear respirators. Many were told to wear respirators, and some did. Of course, the respirator is clunky, very difficult to work with. And while the EPA was saying in the fine print you should wear a respirator, they were shouting from the housetops that the air was safe. So it was a mixed message, as a result of which many people who could have used the respirators didn't. Something like over 70% of the first responders at this point have shown already serious lung abnormalities of one sort or another. And all the data we kept getting in kept telling us this was very toxic. Now, the EPA started lying about it, as I said, And then in the IG's report, it shows, now Christy Todd Whitman I saw on television saying the White House just coordinated. They didn't coordinate. If you look at some of the press releases, the EPA draft and then what was released after the White House got through with it, you see the difference. I'll mention two that were in the IG report specifically. One said, words to the effect of 25% of the outdoor tests show highly elevated 2 and 3 times the safe level or the recommended level limit of asbestos in the air. 25% of the tests show unsafe levels of asbestos in the air. That was the draft. When the White House got through with it, it came out with the vast majority of tests show only safe levels of asbestos, which was true. 75% didn't find it, but 25% found highly dangerous levels of asbestos. So from a warning, you change it into don't worry. And she says that's minor editing. The another one that I recall from the IG's report was the initial draft said, if you're going to remove asbestos or material, World Trade Center debris in your apartment or whatever, make sure you wear protective clothing. It came out publicly without any mention of protective clothing. Those are very significant differences. In any event, we started shouting on October 4th. I formed a coalition of all the local elected officials 2 days after Ground Zero. We called it the Ground Zero Elected Officials Task Force. We retained a private environmental consulting firm to do spot checking to test a few indoor apartments because the EPA was only doing outdoor tests. And they came back highly toxic. The report was published on October 14th, a month after 9/11. We handed this report to EPA, we publicized it, and EPA kept saying nothing except that things are safe. There was subsequent testing of indoor air. Nothing was done about indoor air until in the Senate hearings that Hillary Clinton, at my suggestion, got Joe Lieberman to call in January of 2002. Was that 5 months after Ground Zero? That was the first time the EPA commented on indoor air, and they said, the EPA, we're responsible for the outdoor air, not for the indoor air. The city of New York took the lead on that. Now, they are responsible by law for indoor and outdoor air. The law makes no distinction. And of course, what happened in the indoor air, and this is why the problem is not a question of who lied, when, why, and who's responsible. That is a problem, but it's the less important. The problem, the more important problem, is that nature cleans the outdoor air. Nature does not clean the indoor air. I'm not worried about the air quality outdoors today. I am worried about the air quality indoors because the EPA kept denying that there was a problem indoors. They never did proper testing indoors. They didn't do any kind of cleanup for indoors until May of 2002 when they announced that for PR purposes, everything's fine, they said, but to allay public concern, meaning for public relations purposes, we will clean up apartments upon request. Apartments, not workspaces or schools or firehouses, upon request, which means if you're in apartment 3A and you ask them to clean it up and they do, and assuming they do a decent job, your apartment's going to get recontaminated through the HVAC system from apartment 3B that wasn't cleaned up. You have to handle the building as a whole. They assumed that there was a Star Trek type force field at Canal Street, so only below Canal Street, not across the river. We know that places in Brooklyn and New Jersey were also contaminated. They used only only passive testing with tests designed to show negative because they used what's called large filters, which means the ultrafine particles that are the most dangerous and that came out of the highly pulverized World Trade Center wouldn't register on their tests. All these things the IG said, so their cleanup program was worthless, and as the IG said, we have to do a proper cleanup program now. And let me just say this observation, then we'll go to whatever you want to say. I would say there are 3 victim populations today other than the people killed directly by the terrorists. One are those people caught in the cloud on 9/11. They inhaled an acute dose of God knows what, every toxin known to man. Many of them have gotten sick, many will. There's nothing we can do for them other than monitor them and give them whatever health treatment we can. It's nobody's fault other than the terrorists. Secondly, are the hundreds, maybe thousands of first responders, emergency workers, who, because of mixed messages or false messages from EPA or non-availability of respirators, worked on the pile for 40, 50 days without proper protection, many of whom have gotten sick, many of whom will get sick. Again, it's past tense. You can only try to help them in the future, but someone ought to be held accountable. Third, and perhaps most importantly, to thousands, maybe tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people being slowly poisoned today, but not by acute doses, by small chronic doses of asbestos, lead, cadmium, zinc, mercury every day. Because they're working or living in unsafe workspaces or living spaces. And the point about that is, having done that for a year and a half or 2 years, some of these people will come down with lung cancer or mesothelioma or other life-threatening diseases 15 years from now. But if this continues for another 15 years without cleaning it up, many, many more will. So if we clean it up now, we can save many lives. And the last thing is, if we don't clean it up, I am very much afraid that 50 years from now, when the historians write about this, they will write that more people died early from preventable diseases, within the next 20 years than were killed by the terrorists on 9/11.
Sacramento, California, thank you very much for holding. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning. I don't know if I'm saying your name right. Is it Nader, Representative Nader?
No, Nadler.
Nadler.
And no relation to Ralph Nader.
Nadler, excuse me. I mean, I can appreciate what you're saying, and I do understand, but I think that you're going across lines here in a way that you're saying that the EPA report came out, and what I'm understanding what Ms. Clinton, Senator Clinton and Lieberman was saying was, just plain and simple, they were lying to us.
Well,
okay?
they were.
They were lying to you. They were lying to me. But to get off that, you're also saying stuff about asbestos, and the insight. Okay, that probably was already there prior to 9/11.
No. Let me say this. There have been scientific investigations by environmental teams hired by tenants, hired by private organizations. The World Trade Center the asbestos with which the World Trade Center was built is of a certain type. I think it's called chrysotile or something like that. There are various types of asbestos. It came, by the way, from from a mine in Libby, Montana, where there was a disaster a couple of years ago. That has been identified in many of the buildings with dust and debris from the World Trade Center. But it's not just asbestos. It's lead, it's cadmium, it's zinc, it's mercury, it's all kinds of hydrocarbons, all kinds of things, many of which are toxic, and the effect of which, when combined, the synergistic effects, we don't know. It's never happened before.
Saratoga Springs, New York, you're on with Representative Nadler.
Yes, good morning, Representative Nadler. I want you to know I'm a registered Democrat and have been for years. I'm 75 at this point. And I tell you, you speak in generalities. You name a doctor. You don't name a doctor. You quote a doctor from Mount Sinai Hospital.
I'll name him if you want.
Well, name him.
Steve Levin. He's the head of...
Steve Levin?
Steve Levin.
Why haven't I read anything in the paper by Mr. or Dr.
Well, he's been in the Levin. He's been in the paper in the papers a lot.
I was born and raised in New York City before you were born, and I tell you very frankly, the city has always had a tremendous odor. It's getting worse, and it has been getting worse before 9/11. You're trying to lay all this environmental stuff on the current administration, when if you want to really go back to EPA and what a farce it really is, you can go back to the Clinton administration.
Can I look, I'm not...
wait a minute. You let me finish, because I give you the courtesy of when you speak, I listen.
Go ahead.
I've listened to you in Congress, and very frankly, I don't particularly care for your methods. Very frankly, I never changed parties. But I'm on the verge of doing that because...
Thanks for your call.
Let me say this. First of all, New York is a lot cleaner than it was decades ago, and a lot of the credit for that belongs to Republican Nelson Rockefeller, who did some environmental bond issues. But New York is much cleaner than it was decades ago, without question. I'm not laying the blame for all the environmental pollution in New York on the Bush administration or anybody else. But what I am saying is that the response, and it's not just me, everybody who has looked at this honestly has said so. The EPA ombudsman said so, and they dismantled his office because of that. The EPA IG has said so, and that's what we're quoting from, most of it. And there's plenty of chapter and verse. We don't have much time here to go into all the specifics, although I'll go into any specifics anybody wants. But the facts of the matter and I spoke about some of the specific failings of the so-called cleanup program. I can go into more.
Why don't we take this call from Long Branch, New Jersey? Go ahead.
Good morning, gentlemen. How are you today?
Good morning.
I'm going to start by saying Bush is the worst president in my history, and I'm 50. I'm Frank Pallone's my congressman, and I volunteer for him, and I'm very proud of that.
He's a good man.
I know. I think. Thank you. Coming from New Jersey, I could tell you Christy Whitman's history, and it's not good. And I'm not surprised at all that the Bush administration would have her lie about the outcome of the whole thing, because now we have our country is of the corporation, by the corporation, for the corporation, and the whole thing's making me sick, to be honest with you. I don't really have a question for you, but you really have a big fight on your hands. And
thank you, and let me just say this. The question of who lied and so forth is an important question, but the more important question, which I keep trying to shift the emphasis to, the press wants to say who lied and when, and we know that Christy Whitman, the EPA, lied, and the White House apparently directed that according to the IG, but the more important thing is to get a proper cleanup, to do the test, the spot checking in indoor environments, in concentric circles out from the World Trade Center, in Brooklyn, in Queens, in New Jersey, we know the ash fell there too, in Manhattan, and find out where that problem is, and then do a proper cleanup. Spend $500 million or $1 billion or whatever is necessary to do a proper cleanup, so that 15 years from now we don't have thousands of people coming down with all kinds of life-threatening illnesses, and so that 15 years from now we don't have tens of billions of dollars of lawsuits against the federal, state, and city government, which we will have it the way things are going.
Los Angeles, go ahead.
You're going to have those lawsuits anyway. Those trial lawyers are your biggest.
You're not going to have.
Now wait a minute! Don't you start talking.
Let me just say, you're going to have a lot fewer lawsuits if fewer people get sick. Go ahead.
Los Angeles.
May I speak?
Yeah, make your point.
Okay, you're not telling people that these are Clinton holdovers in the EPA, and that you need to keep the environmentalists on your side and hitting Republicans forever. We were under attack, Mr. Nadler. You just said that for 40 or 50 days, firemen couldn't get masks working on that pile.
That's
right.
What
a blatant lie that is.
I'm sorry, it happens to be true. Some of them couldn't get masks. You talked to the United Firefighters Association. The basis for my statement was testimony at the Ombudsman's hearings by a reservist in military intelligence who's also a cop, not a firefighter, who said that 800 people that he worked with had not been able to get respirators. That was his sworn testimony. And the fact is, this caller was a perfect example of what the administration's response has been. He didn't deal with the facts. He simply questioned my motives. He said that I wanted to attack the administration or whatever. And that the people who report, and that the IG and the people are Clinton holdovers. Yes, the Inspector General of the EPA, actually is not a Clinton holdover. She was there. She's been an EPA apparently for decades, prior to Clinton. She was appointed during the Clinton administration, she was appointed Inspector General, and during the Bush administration, she was reappointed Inspector General. So, and the implication that just because someone was in government during the Clinton administration means they're dishonest, you can't trust them. She was reappointed by Bush. And again, as I said, the Ombudsman said this, the Inspector General said this, the Ombudsman's office was dismantled because they had the nerve to say it. So I hope that people, if they want to dispute the facts on some basis or dispute the logic, but don't just say you're a Democrat, therefore what you're saying is politically motivated. Just talk about the facts.
Sebring, Florida, go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Nadler, and thank you so much for bringing these issues out into the public. This administration has been so secretive about everything. They don't think that the American people have the wherewithal or the mental capacity to understand what's going on in the country, I think. And I'm just sick to death of it. This train wreck of a presidency has ruined our country. And thank you for all the work you've done and that you're doing.
Well, you're welcome. But again, the main thing here is not whether Bush is a good or bad president. I have my own thoughts on that. You can guess what they are. The main thing here is to get a proper testing and cleanup done in the New York area. Yes, we were attacked by terrorists, but we shouldn't want to magnify the effect of what the terrorists did by letting people live and work in unsafe environments for a few decades, so that many, many more people have their lives shortened by the results of what the terrorists did than if we cleaned it up properly. And that's the most important thing right now, to get a proper investigation and I don't mean an investigation who did what, but a proper testing regimen and a proper cleanup decontamination program, so that we save lives. And let me give one example of this. The New York City Department of Health put on its website, and this is not just the Bush administration, it's every level of government, and the executive branch were almost as culpable. The New York City Department of Health put on its website, as far as I know, it's still there, that if you come back into your apartment, you find World Trade Center dust and debris, clean it up with a wet mop and a wet rag. And if it's really bad, wear long pants and consider HEPA vacuum. Now, that advice is reckless endangerment. Because if you're not trained properly, now, first of all, it's illegal advice. Federal and state law both say that if there's asbestos-laden material anywhere, no one may remove it or move it or deal with it unless they're licensed and certified to do so and wearing proper protective equipment, which most people in their apartments are not. Secondly, it's dangerous. If you start removing that yourself, you're going to breathe in some of it. And equally importantly, you may remove a lot of it, but a lot of it is going to go into the porous wood surfaces, into the carpet, into the drapes, and every time you walk on that carpet or the baby crawls on it, a little of it is going to be pushed into the air. You're going to breathe it for the next 20 years.
Tell us about
that's the problem.
Tell us about the congressional investigation that you've called for into the federal government's efforts on this.
Well, I have called for and Nancy Pelosi, the Democratic leader in the House, joined me and other Democratic leaders of committees in calling for a House investigation. Senator Clinton called for a Senate investigation. I asked the Justice Department to look into it. But what we've asked for an investigation is into two things. Number one, who told the truth or didn't tell the truth or manipulated information in a way that might lead people to do unsafe things. I mean, the initial response. And number two, an investigation into whether, in fact, a proper testing and decontamination program is necessary now.
Hoffman Heights, Colorado, go ahead. Hoffman Heights? Sorry.
Mr. Nadler, that was an extreme emergency.
Yes, it was.
And the firefighters, the rescue people, ran in there to save people's lives. They were given respirators. The country was donating equipment. And, I mean, if it happens again, what are we going to do? Are you and Senator Clinton going to go down to a site and demand that nobody goes near the scene of an explosion like that until the air is clean? The EPA, there's another law on the books that says it's illegal to occupy any building with asbestos. Are we going to evacuate New York City for the next 30 years? Is that your solution?
Well, let me answer you two questions. First, I'm not aware of that law, that it's illegal to occupy any building with asbestos. I don't know of any such law. But second of all, it's illegal to build a building now with asbestos. And it's illegal to remove existing asbestos or to repair things around the asbestos without taking proper precautionary measures, wearing protective clothing, and being licensed or certified that you know what you're doing. No, certainly we're not going to urge people not to go in there. And yes, it was an extreme emergency. And I don't criticize anybody for not wearing respirators or not providing respirators or whatever during the first few days afterwards. But by a few days passed, 3, 4, 5, 6 days, a week maybe, I don't know, some amount of time, you should have gotten organized and provided the respirators. The testimony we had at the Ombudsman hearings in March of last year, with that 800 police officers and police cadets worked on the pile for 41 days without respirators, though they asked for them. They were told they were unavailable, although, again, the testimony said that there were thousands lying unused in National Guard armories all around the city and its vicinity. I suppose what I would recommend is that protective respirators be more widely available and distributed to firehouses and police precincts and so forth, so that in case, God forbid, of another emergency, they have them more readily available. But I'm not criticizing anybody for what they did in terms of the emergency response in the first few days. But after they got organized properly, and it was a major cleanup job. It was a debris removal job. It wasn't even a rescue job, because when you knew the temperatures and they were 800 degrees, you knew nobody was alive after the first few days. Then it was simply a debris removal job. You should have done it with proper safety precautions, which very often we know now weren't done. And I'm critical of the EPA, not for not having respirators there right away, that wasn't within their capability, but for giving out misinformation, which caused many people not to use the respirators that they had.
Lancaster, Pennsylvania, you're on the Washington Journal.
Oh, thank you. Representative Nadler, I followed you. I really appreciate all that you are doing for your country.
Thank you.
And I actually recently I didn't have a question until it dawned on me. I have a friend whose windows during the terrorist attack were blown out in their apartment. And she's been trying to get pregnant now, and she is now, but she sounds like she's going to lose the baby. Do you think these pollutants could be the cause of that?
Conceivably, I'm not a medical expert, but conceivably, I mean, she should certainly see a doctor and talk about that. And if her windows were blown out, that means it was close enough to have considerable force. She should get her apartment tested by a good environmental testing firm.
Mike Leavitt was in front of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee this week on his nomination to be the administrator at EPA. Senator Clinton says that she would block that unless the EPA comes forth with a report reassuring the public about the safety of the air in New York City after the World Trade Center attacks. Is that a good move on her part?
Well, I think it is. I don't think the EPA can come forward with a report reassuring the public about the safety of the air. I think what she's asking for is an explanation of what they did and a proper testing and cleanup program now. I mean, to demand that someone assure us that the air was okay when it probably wasn't, when it definitely wasn't okay, is not doable. But yes, I think it's very good that she's doing that. I commend her for doing that, because the administration, for whatever reasons, has simply denied everything and stonewalled and been unable to do anything. Who said that? Who's a pediatrician, who said that he told hundreds of parents it was okay to send their kids back to school. He relied on the EPA assurances. He wished he hadn't done it, because he now has to call all these people and say the kids had better be examined because the air was not safe. Based on those assurances, we know that many of the first responders, the cops, the firefighters from all over the country didn't use respirators. We also know that, contrary to what Christy Todd Whitman has said, many of them were not given respirators. Many were told, don't wear respirators. Many were told to wear respirators, and some did. Of course, the respirator's clunky, very difficult to work with. And while the EPA was saying in the fine print you should wear a respirator, they were shouting from the housetops that the air was safe. So it was a mixed message, as a result of which many people who could have used the respirators didn't. Something like over 70% of the first responders at this 3 weeks after 9/11, and those instruments stayed there and they kept getting readings at least through the end of January. And we knew by October 3rd or 4th, they told us, they told the EPA, they told anybody who had listened, that the readings a mile north of ground zero 3 weeks afterwards were the worst cocktail brew of toxins they'd ever seen, worse than the Kuwaiti oil fire. That was the direct quote at the time. And that was true at least as late as late January of 2002, the outdoor air. Nonetheless, we kept getting all these reassurances that everything was okay, on the basis of which people told their employees, you got to come back to work, even though the air is unsafe, because they believed, the EPA said so, the air was safe, on the basis of which schools reopened in the area, and parents were told it's okay. We had testimony recently at a press conference from a doctor at Mount Sinai, a lung expert.
Per apartment?
Per apartment.
And who would pay for that?
Federal government. It's mandate under law.
Tell us about the initial government response to dealing with the air quality surrounding the World Trade Center after the attacks.
Well, the initial government response was frankly terrible, and what I'm about to say, everything I'm about to say came out in the Inspector General's report, but everything I'm about to say, everything that was in the Inspector General's report was not new. I had been saying it for almost 2 years. Environmental groups had been saying it. Others had been saying it. The Ombudsman's Office of EPA said it, and because they said it, Christy Todd Whitman dismantled the Ombudsman's Office, destroyed the office. The only thing new in the IG report was that the misrepresentations and lies that the EPA told us were done at the direction of the White House. That we didn't know. Everything else was quite well known to people who were looking into it, and of course vociferously denied by the EPA and the administration, but also meticulously documented. The first thing that happened was within 2 days of the disaster, Christy Todd Whitman went on the air and said, the head of the EPA went on the air and said that the air was safe to breathe and New Yorkers could go back to work without worrying about it. When she said that, there had been zero testing done She had no basis in data to say that. She kept saying it. The EPA kept saying it, even after there was at first sketchy and then voluminous data to say that the air was far from safe. For example, the University of California, Davis, headed by a fellow named Thomas, I think his first name, Cahill, set up instruments on the roof of the federal building at Varick and Houston Street, the building my office is in, which is a mile north of Ground Zero. They did this on October 3rd.
Is the air quality around Ground Zero a hazard?
Yes. The indoor air quality is undoubtedly a hazard in many places. The problem is, since proper testing hasn't been done, we don't know how many places, we don't know how many thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people are being slowly poisoned by contaminated workspaces and schools and apartments. As the Inspector General recommended, we ought to do proper indoor testing in going out in concentric circles from the World Trade Center. We may find that in one direction the problem is 3 blocks. We may find that in another direction it's 3 miles. And then we have to systematically and properly clean up, decontaminate those apartments and workspaces. Testimony at the Ombudsman hearing a year and a half ago said that the average cost of decontaminating properly an apartment would be between $10,000 and $20,000.